Welcome to Around the Empire. I'm your host, Joanne Leon. Around the Empire podcast, listener-supported independent media. Pitch in if you can, patreon.com/aroundtheempire or paypal.me/aroundtheempirepod. Also, please like, share, and subscribe on YouTube. Régis Le Sommier joins us, and we talk about the fact that the United States and its Western allies are in denial about having lost the war in Syria. Calls to reboot that war are unrealistic and against the wishes of the majority of Syrian people living in the government-controlled areas. It's still suffering under sanctions, and whose voices are rarely heard in the Western media. The sanctions are being used in an effort to keep options open for a regime change and to deny the Assad government the opportunity to rebuild and stabilize that country. Western leaders and media are also in denial about the nature and the objectives of the people who control the opposition-held areas. Régis brings us insights from having spent time in Syria on the ground in both government and opposition-controlled areas. And I just want to issue one correction. In the interview, I said that Jennifer Caparaella worked for the Institute for the Study of Peace, but the name of the organization is the Institute for the Study of War, so apologies for that. Régis Le Sommier is a director at the Paris Match magazine. He's covered American presidential elections, interviewed several American presidents, other leaders and celebrities, and he's reported from many places around the world, including Iraq and Afghanistan, and he also spent time on the ground in Syria and significantly in both the government and opposition-held areas. Régis Le Sommier is here speaking to us from France. Hello, Régis. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Hello, great to be here.
Okay, so this conversation was initiated when both Régis and I and some other people reacted to a sort of plan or a proposal that was put out by a woman named Jennifer Caparaella, and she's from, I think a lot of people will be familiar with her. She's from the Institute for the Study of Peace, which is a very ironic name for this think tank, because it's run by Kimberly Kagan, and I think it's safe to assume that the perspective, the point of view, and the objectives of this group of people is similar to Robert Kagan, Michelle Flournoy, some of the people who in fact were Jennifer brings up actually some of things that sound a little bit like some of the proposals that are kind of hybrid, neoconservative, neoliberal that we were hearing from the Hillary camp in 2016, and it almost sounds like a reboot of some of those. And basically, it's titled "Time to Recommit to Syria," and we can talk about some of the details of it as in this conversation, but it got a pretty strong reaction from both of us and from some others. And I just wanted to hear some of your thoughts on it, if you would.
Yes, sure. I reacted to this particular, I didn't know the name of the think tank, but it's very ironic that a think tank that has an objective to achieve peace wants actually more war, especially in a country like Syria. I've been covering Syria for over pretty much since the beginning of the war, and I took probably 10 trips to the country in the past 5 years. And what I can say from the ground over there, and I'm not talking only to the government side, which I cover mostly. I also did a piece with to give you a bit of perspective on the rebel side, especially rebel living Ghouta in 2018. I got to interview them for at least 3 hours, and they were free there. I mean, during this conversation, these guys wanted to go to Idlib to carry on the fight. So they were living Ghouta, but they were not committing to the government side. So it was a very interesting piece, being able to actually talk to these people. And all I can say, roughly from all my trips to Syria, is that the country is a wreck. People are actually starving not only in the Idlib pocket, where you can see a lot of movement and a lot of about 900,000 refugees right now that are blocked at the Turkish border and in dire condition. You know, some babies are dying of hunger. There's the cold, the snow. So it's a very, very bad situation. But it's also a bad situation in the whole of Syria. Let me give you a few figures, for instance. Within Syria right now, you have about 6 million people that have been moved or displaced within the country. And you don't hear much about these people because this concerns the government side. And this is not talking about the refugees, which are outside, about 3.7 million in Turkey and about 1 million in Jordan and Lebanon. So it's if you add those figures, if you had the 6 million people displaced within Syria to the 5 million that are outside, you have about 11 million people that are not in their home. And 11 million people is roughly half of the whole Syrian population. So my point in giving this figure, so you have 1 Syrian out of 2 living outside of its home right now. So it's an incredible situation. And even though the government has reconquered a great 80% of the country at this point, well, the economic input has not come back. So meaning the country is under sanctions. It is suffocated by the sanctions. And of course, as you know, sanctions don't really affect the people they aim to affect in many places in the world, meaning the leaders. The leaders keep having their way of life, whereas the people are really the ones being sanctioned. So when I see pieces like this written on people, the point of my tweet was that people comfortably seated in a think tank office, sipping latte and eating donuts in Washington, D.C., wants to add more misery to a country that is already suffocating and that has been out through 9 years of war. So whatever are the intention, to me, it seems pretty clear that it's another attempt of bring U.S. back into being a superpower, which is a trend that we've seen in many of these think tanks. Some people might get disappointed even by the policy of Trump, who is more isolationist than these people are. But they want to show that the U.S. is not only the greatest country in the world, which on their point of view is I don't really know what this means, but the most powerful country, and that leaving Syria would be would mean actually admitting defeat or admitting a sort of so it's not a question about the Syrian people. It's only the question of the U.S. interest and the U.S. power in the world, and this is why I reacted to this tweet, because to me there's this trend of these people that are totally disconnected to what's going on the ground and that are not indeed working for peace or anything that would bring a solution or an end to this absolutely humongous and horrible war in Syria.
Right. I couldn't agree with you more on that. And we don't know the IDPs. I guess they're reported as IDPs, internally displaced people. We don't hear a lot. I'm not sure about the reporting in Europe, but here in the United States, we tend to hear much more about the people in the rebel-held areas. There's a lot of sympathy for them, but there's not a lot of sympathy for the people in the government-controlled areas. And, not all of them are, I think they're grateful to be in an area that's stabilized, but, we know that they're not always, great fans of their own government. Find me any country where the entire population is, loves their government. There's always differences and things, and it's not perfect. And as you said, they're under sanctions, and there are some people who I follow who have friends or family in Syria, and even people in the stabilized area I've seen pictures.
But
People have posted
mhm.
pictures of people standing in line for simple things like cooking oil. They don't have the basics, the heating oil, and of course, you've got the
Well,
whole black market thing going on whenever
mhm.
there are
Yeah,
sanctions. Um,
inflation and everything.
oh, incredible inflation,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. And
Yeah,
but yeah, I want to let me
and of course
react
you've
to
been
this.
there.
It's really important because when the image that some media gives from Syria is that the actual Syrian people are on the opposition side. I mean, there's about 2 million people roughly in Idlib right now, which is the last pocket held by the opposition. And well, I'm going to linger a little bit on what the position is at this point, but in Syria. But if to go back to the displaced people and the people on the stabilized or on the government side that have, on territories that have been held by the government since the beginning of the war and territories that have been reconquered. These people are the majority of the Syrians, and what's interesting in this way of tackling of the Syrian problem of reporting on Syria. And we are not reporting on the majority of people.
Yes.
And it's an overwhelming majority. It's probably between 14 and 15 million people that are living on the government side, and only 2 million are living on the... I don't deny that these 2 million have problems, but talking about Syrians and talking as if it's just a fantasy. It's ludicrous to think that whatever, the outcome of this war, this, opposition that is still in Idlib is able at this point to reconquer the country. So we have to face what's going on, whether we like Bashar al-Assad and his regime, and there's a lot to say about the way the politics is conducted in Syria, and we are facing a really tough regime and with very bad habits. But that's not the point. The point is to be, as my goal as a journalist is to tell as much close as I can to the truth. And we have to look at Syria not as the Syrian we wish it would have become, but as Syria as it is. And these days, I'm sorry, but the overwhelming majority of people are living on the government side, and we don't hear about them. And we don't hear, and when you talk about the sanction, people don't realize that how much the sanction, as you've mentioned them, how much the sanctions are affecting the everyday life of people. I'm going to give you a few other figures about, and then we'll go to the the question of the opposition. If you take the main towns of Syria, city like Homs, where fighting virtually ceased since 2014. There was a neighborhood in the northeast of Homs that stayed under rebel control up until 2018. But roughly the city of Homs has seen fighting since 2014. Well, still today, 25% of Homs is in rubble. It's dust and wreckage. Take Aleppo. Aleppo is a town of 190 kilometers square, which is 2 times the size of Paris. Aleppo has roughly 1.5 million people, maybe a little more, since people have started to come back. A third of Aleppo is destroyed. Take Deir ez-Zor, which is in the east. 45%, almost half of the town, is destroyed. Take a city like Raqqa. Raqqa is the worst. 80% of the city has been destroyed. So this gives you figures on the huge efforts that will need being delivered in order to rebuild these cities. And the huge investment, and we are talking about between $200 and $400 billion, the whole cost of the Syrian reconstruction. And right now, nothing can really start. The Russians give to the Syrian their expertise and strength in military might. The Iranians also are very present to fight, but these two countries are not really investing in reconstructions. So the Syrians right now are blocked by international sanctions, especially sanctions dictated by the United States. And these sanctions are really crippling the country and making it impossible. So, this way of like you were mentioning Jennifer Caparaella, who wants the U.S. obviously to be more present, who wants the U.S. to not to, for the sole purpose of not giving the victory to Bashar al-Assad. That's what they don't want. They say, okay, he's won the war militarily, but he's going to fail. We're going to put more and more sanctions, and we're going to make it impossible for people to live in this country. I don't think it's the way you're going to achieve peace in any time, I don't think, even for the question of strategy, the problem with the U.S. and Syria and the U.S. presence in Syria, it never had a strategy. Yes. People are still unable to know what the U.S. are really doing. At least Trump had this straightforward message when he said, and people were mocking him on both sides, saying when he said, we secure the oil. Okay, we secure the oil. I mean, before the war, I think Syria was the 23rd producer of oil in the whole world, which is decent, but it's not big. It's not like oil in Iraq or in Iran or in Saudi Arabia. It's nothing compared. It's the small output. It's small production of oil. So keeping the oil, I think Trump meant by saying that they were securing the oil field in order to trade them at some points or to bargain them in a sort of diplomatic, ball game, which would happen at the end of the day, because I don't see the U.S. Staying forever, keeping the oil. And guess what? The Kurds, well, we've betrayed the Kurds. We've forced the Kurds to go back to Assad's side and to strike a military deal with him, because otherwise what the Turks have achieved in the northeast would be completely blown off by Turkey. And even though the U.S. And the U.S. openly right now supports Turkey. So it's a big irony, and the problem from the start of the U.S. intervention in Iraq. I mean, Iraq is a different game, but in Syria, it was to help the Kurds. It was to help the Kurds defeat ISIS. Now, okay, people might argue that ISIS is waging a guerrilla, that it's holding, in the dark and will come back and make a comeback. We've heard that for over 2 years, and nothing is materialized really. I mean, it is danger. The threat is there, but I don't think it's justified the U.S. presence, and even the French presence, because we've sent recently our own aircraft carrier. We have one, in the U.S. probably 10, but we have one, and we sent the aircraft carrier, and our Ministry of Defense was saying, our aircraft carrier is going to go back to the Eastern Mediterranean in order to fight ISIS. And I said to myself, what are you going to fight? Are you going to fight sleeping cells? Are you going to fight people living in caves or fighters that are hiding somewhere? I mean, there's no military objectives with ISIS anymore. It doesn't hold a territory. So, bringing an aircraft carrier to do that is just, rhetoric. It's just show of power. And of course, the threat of ISIS is still very present, but it's much less present than it was. And the goal and the presence of the U.S. and the coalition over there is no more requested, on my point of view. And also, I would probably trust more the Iraqi and the Syrians to tackle with those sleeping cells, because they know where they are. And the Kurds, of course, have a huge habit of dealing with ISIS. So, the local people are actually able to take care of this threat, and we don't need to be there. But we keep being there. We keep being there because we've lost the war. Basically, Assad won the war, and you still have people that can't fathom that. And so instead of looking at the reality and saying, okay, at this point, the guy who made the best deal out of his intervention, and was, of course, Vladimir Putin. And there's no way you can go around it. you might disagree with him, you might, hate him, but, you have to face reality. And facing reality is not putting out reports from Washington, D.C. Again, a very comfortable place to speak because there's no war. And this is another thing, when I see these people talk and when I see them, argue over the internet, you Americans, you've never had your country destroyed. You've never had your town destroyed. We French, we had that. Europe has been in rubble, and thank you, the U.S. helped us liberate Europe in 44, 45. But we saw our city, turn to rubble. And what's going on in Syria right now, what has been going on in 9 years, was, one after the other, the Syrian city went to rubble. So it's easy to say, okay, yeah, we're going to, it's always this thing, but that's why probably 9/11 was such a shock for Americans, because seeing that an actual building or an actual place within the heart of America could be destroyed by, terrorists or other, terrorists and people like this. So that was probably why it was such a shock, because you've never had any invasion of your land. So it's another thing. So it's very easy to put out this report, again, disconnected from reality, again, very pro-power, for certain lobby, because I can't specifically name them behind, but this is, what Eisenhower in his famous speech say, the industrial and military complex.
Right.
It's why it feared the most of this huge, and look at the figures. The budget of the Department of Defense in the U.S. has risen to $740 billion.
And it's really way more than that. Really way more. It's really more than $1 trillion. Yeah.
It's incredible, because it represents the 12 countries, the equivalent of the budget of the 12 countries that follows. So including China, France, the UK, Germany, etc., etc., etc. So the U.S. has this humongous power, a humongous military power, and obviously some people want it to be used and want it to be spent somewhere in foolish interventions very far away from the homeland.
Yeah, and it's also everything that you said. I don't disagree with any of that. And the other thing to remember too is that these viewpoints, this refusal to, most Americans don't care that we did not win this war in Syria. Most Americans in 2013 said, hell no, don't start another war in the Middle East. Something like 2/3 of military veterans in a recent poll said that neither the Iraq War nor the Afghanistan War was even worth fighting. And that was pretty much in line with the general public poll. It's kind of a silent majority because people are afraid to seem unpatriotic. But the American people do not want another war. Don't want another war.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And you know why? And the proof of that is that they elected,
yes,
and this is probably their only common point that they have, Obama and Trump.
Yeah.
Obama and Trump were elected on anti-war program, on anti-intervention program, on tiredness of endless war. And those two last presidents were a consequence of Bush, the Bush era of foreign intervention and foreign policy directed to committing to endless wars. Absolutely.
Right. And that's even without, as you mentioned, having lived in war zones, having been invaded, having been had cities destroyed and all that. We haven't even had that. So just imagine what it would be like, what the sentiment would be like if we did,
of course, if you had a past like
price.
this. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
absolutely.
So, and you can see that playing out in the 2020 war. You can see it playing out in the massive pushback against Trump for even just a minor anti-interventionist stance. And so what we're really dealing with here are people in the war profiteers. It's basically the war profiteers.
Yeah.
And
totally.
as you say, the people who just can't face reality. They cannot face reality.
Totally.
So
Totally. And you know, at the end of the day, and you have to say that to your the people that listen to your show, and there's one thing very important, and if you will, I'm gonna give you a few examples. To go to the what is the Syrian opposition and the side we are supposed to support against Assad. You know, Idlib has been partly reconquered by the Syrian army, and during this phase of reconquer, the Syrian army took what's called the M5 highway. Right. So the M5 highway is basically the 405 of Syria. It links Aleppo to Damascus. It's really the economic heart, which is Aleppo, the economic hub to the administration in Damascus. So it's really and this chunk of the M5 was under rebel control, and the Syrian army has been taken over this. And during this taken over, they've uncovered a number of signs that were written in those areas. You know, on the road, little signs. And I'm going to give you an example of what was written by the various rebel faction. The main one being HTS, which is called Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, which is the offshoot of al-Nusra, the new name of al-Nusra, al-Nusra being the Syrian offshoot of al-Qaeda. So it reads what you find on the roads, on the little roads and main roads over there. The son of the caliphate will rise again. It is forbidden for men and women to be together. You ought to do jihad. Islam is our way. God looks at you. Smoking is prohibited by God. Secular people are the infidels. Democracy is the religion of the West. Democracy is the monster of our age. Democracy gather infidels against Islam. Democracy and secularism will go against Islam. Brother jihadists, be aware. Those who refuse Islam are our enemies. Hijab is compulsory, etc., etc., etc. So when you look at these signs in places that are not always held by the most extremists, well, then that gives you a little bit of sense of what is in this opposition held land motivation, and what are these people? Basically, they are jihadists. There are about 30,000 jihadists holding Idlib at this point. And one of the defense representative, a general, I believe, just put out a statement confirming that the U.S. was very worried about the number and the style of the people holding Idlib. Of course, the guy was bashed over the internet, saying, he's giving food to Bashar al-Assad playbook. He's an
Assad apologist,
and the Russians. Yeah. Exactly, because he just mentioned what it was. You have certain groups that are compounded, and one specifically, I'm going to linger a little bit on it, which is called the Islamic Party of Turkestan. Turkestan, nothing to do with Turkey. Turkestan is the Chinese region of Xinjiang, where the Uyghur population, the Chinese Muslim population is. So you have about 1,500 of Uyghur fanatics that came all the way from China to fight jihad in Idlib. They committed not to ISIS, but they committed to Al-Qaeda. And you also have Katibas, which is fighting groups of French origin, especially a guy named Mar Omsen, who is originated from the town of Nice, and who has his group over there, about 100 people fighting. You have, of course, HTS, which is the bigger group, the most structured, the most well-equipped, who the Turkish, by the way, are giving tanks and materials, and especially manpads, which are allowed those rebels to shoot down 2 government helicopters. So there's a step, because the Turkish are slowly giving them some weapons. They don't give them all the weapons because they don't trust them completely. Actually, the irony of all this is Erdogan might appear as he's the godfather of all these groups, but he doesn't really care about them. He cares, his only obsession is to push back the Kurds as far as he can from his border and to be able to resettle some Arab Syrian at the border of Turkey so that he gets a buffer zone from the Kurds. That's his obsession, and that's the obsession of the Turks, and they don't really care about those people. And the proof of that is they take them as mercenary and they send them all the way to Libya to fight for another side in Libya. So Turkey is trying to internationally use these people, but Turkey don't give a shit about changing the regime. That's another irony, because these people, these neocons and all that, think that actually Erdogan would like to change and to see Assad gone, but actually he doesn't really care. That's not his point. His point is he cannot fathom the existence of a Kurdistan or Kurdish state at the south of his border. And that's why there is a huge problem between the sort of U.S. strategy which was to strengthen these people and the fact that Turkey was on the side of the U.S. in NATO. And so at the end of the day, the U.S. decided to choose Turkey over the Kurds. So this is really important to settle that. This is really important. I'm not saying that all the people, again, in Idlib are terrorists. This is not true. There are people trapped in these fights. There are people that are trapped against their will. There are people that don't want to go to the government side. That's true. They hate the government. They don't want to be with the rebels. They just want to be free, and they try to escape and go to Turkey and try to resettle over there. But it seems impossible since the border has been closed by the Turks, and they put guards ready to shoot anyone attempting to cross. So it's a dire situation in Idlib. But the situation, again, I'm saying this, is dire in the rest of Syria. Aleppo has just been breathing without any rebel groups, especially on its western front, because the Syrian army got rid of them. But Aleppo is starving. A major city of Syria right now is really starving. People go for one meal a day. They are relieved because they don't get rockets sent in downtown Aleppo, but they cannot find food. They cannot find the basic needs. And so that does not concern only Idlib. Some people are living in camps over there too. And as I said at the introduction of this interview, about 6 million people in Syria are displaced, are not in their homes.
Right. Well, it looks like I've need to let you go for a few minutes, but I really appreciate your point of view.
Yeah, me too.
And I really appreciate, especially because you've been there, you've been on the ground. And I mean, we have to, in just small independent media outlets, if we just tell the truth, you know what I mean? Just tell the truth.
Yeah. Sure.
But it's amazing how hard it is to get that particularly in American media, but it's all across Western media. I mean, to me, you seem like the exception to the rule in Western media. But I don't read French media, so I don't really know. Maybe you're getting a lot more realistic view there, but we certainly are not.
No. We have a lot of same like in the U.S. And sometimes I wonder, and I have a lot of respect for my colleagues in the New York Times or even in CNN, but sometimes I see their reports, especially the latest on Idlib. They go there, they go in camps held by the Turks right around the border. Okay, they tell the awful situation these people are living in. People sometimes have left their homes or left their place many times. Like some people displaced in Idlib have left, resettled in some place, and then left this place again, and then left this place again. So it's really a very terrible situation for them. But you can report on these people and actually tell the truth about the groups that are holding the Idlib pocket. And this is my point of criticism from seasoned reporters that I see. I'm not going to name them here, but they should do their work in saying who is really holding Idlib. And Brent McCurt, who was the special envoy of the U.S. To Iraq and Syria, said once famously that Idlib was the biggest concentration of Al-Qaeda fighters in the world since 9/11. That's a statement from a U.S. representative. That's not a statement from Russian or Syrian governments. It's a statement from and people must bear in mind this: the danger of these people in Idlib. That doesn't mean we have to kill all the civilians. We should find a solution, and maybe we should force Erdogan in a much more efficient way to actually deal with these people, because that's part of the agreement Erdogan has signed. The Sochi agreement with the Russians. He must do his part. He must disarm these groups, and he never did that. And quite the contrary, right now, he's giving them weapons to fight the Syrian army. Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, you just hit on the main, most important point of the problem in the current situation is he did not follow through on that deal. That was, I guess, more than a year ago now. And
he didn't fulfill any of his obligations with the Astana and the Sochi agreements.
Right.
Any.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for having the courage to tell the truth about it, because when I first arranged this dinner with you, I didn't realize, like, you've interviewed presidents, you are definitely part of the establishment media, and you're telling the truth, and I thank you for that, because you're in the minority, and I hope you can convince more people to do that, and I hope we can talk again sometime soon.
Yeah, me too. I appreciate talking to you. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Okay, great. And again, thanks so much. I'll talk to you later.
Thanks.
Thank you for listening. Special thanks to Régis Le Sommier. Follow him on Twitter at Le Sommier Régis, LESOMMIER RGIS. And find his work at Paris Match Magazine, parismatch.com. Around the Empire podcast, independent media, and your support's really important. Pitch in if you can, patreon.com/aroundtheempire or paypal.me/aroundtheempirepod. You can find this podcast and listen to it in a lot of different ways. Find it on any mobile podcast app, or on the website aroundtheempire.com, on Patreon, or on YouTube. And if you're listening on YouTube, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Follow on Twitter at Around the Empire, and we'll see you next time. Take care, everyone.